A storm raged across the night as a young woman fled the chains that others had chosen for her. She thought she had vanished into the shadows, unseen, unheard, until a single lantern flame pierced the darkness. And there, in the quiet of a forgotten barn, she came face to face with a man whose power could save her or destroy her. A secret trembles on her lips, a past she fears is hunting her, and a choice awaits: surrender to duty or gamble everything for freedom. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from today, and what do you love most about period romances? The rain pounded against the thatched roof of the old carriage house like 1,000 accusing fingers. Eleanor Hawthorne huddled in the corner, her muslin gown soaked through, clinging to her skin like a second layer of regret. She was 20 years old, with chestnut hair plastered to her pale cheeks and eyes the color of storm-tossed seas, wide now with a mix of terror and defiance. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small locket at her throat, the only remnant of a life she was fleeing. It had all unraveled so quickly. Just yesterday, in the drawing room of her family's modest estate in the rolling hills of the Cotswolds, her father had announced the betrothal. "It's for the good of the family, Eleanor," he'd said, his voice firm, eyes avoiding hers. The suitor was Mr. Reginald Thorne, a widower twice her age, with a fortune built on wool mills and a reputation stained by whispers of cruelty. Marriage to him meant security for her ailing mother and younger sisters, but for Eleanor it meant chains. She couldn't breathe at the thought of his cold hands, his possessive gaze during the single dinner they'd shared. No, she wouldn't become another ornament in his grim household, so under the cover of twilight she'd slipped away. No note, no farewell. Just a hastily packed satchel with a few coins, a change of clothes, and that locket, her mother's gift, engraved with a single word: freedom. The roads from their village of Willowbrook were muddy quagmires after the spring storms, and she'd walked for hours, her half-boots caked in filth, until exhaustion forced her into this abandoned barn on the outskirts. It belonged to some grand estate, she supposed, but in the darkness it was just shelter from the downpour. A crack of thunder shook the beams overhead. Eleanor flinched, pulling her shawl tighter. What now? She had no plan beyond escape. Perhaps she'd find work as a governess in a distant town or seamstress in Bath. Anything to avoid the trap closing around her. Her heart raced with the thrill of rebellion, but doubt crept in like the chill wind through the cracks. What if they sent men after her? Her father, ever the respectable vicar, would be humiliated. The village gossips would feast on the scandal for years. She closed her eyes, willing sleep to come, when a low whinny echoed from the stalls. Horses! Someone was here. Panic surged through her veins. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, behind a stack of hay bales that smelled of earth and neglect. Footsteps splashed outside, boots heavy and deliberate. The barn door creaked open, letting in a gust that carried the scent of wet wool and leather. A lantern's glow pierced the gloom. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a greatcoat that dripped rainwater onto the straw-strewn floor. He moved with the assurance of a man who owned the night, pausing to shake off his hat. Dark hair, tousled by the storm, framed a face chiseled by hardship, strong jaw, piercing blue eyes that scanned the space like a predator sensing prey. "Who's there?" His voice was deep, commanding, with the polished edge of aristocracy. Eleanor held her breath. He stepped closer, the light swinging, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. She could see the signet ring on his hand now, glinting gold, the mark of nobility. A duke. In this remote corner of Gloucestershire. He stopped mere feet from her hiding spot, his gaze locking onto the faint outline of her form. "I can hear you breathing. Come out, now!" Eleanor's mind whirled. Run, fight, but her limbs felt leaden, rooted by fear. Slowly she emerged, chin lifted in false bravado, though her knees threatened to buckle. The lantern light bathed her in unforgiving yellow, revealing the mud on her hem, the tear in her sleeve. The man's eyebrows arched, surprise flickering across his features before settling into wary curiosity. "A runaway, I presume." "This is my property, miss. Explain yourself." She swallowed hard, meeting his stare. I seek only shelter from the rain, sir. I'll leave at first light. No harm done." He studied her, the silence stretching taut as a bowstring. Rain drummed on, a relentless backdrop to the standoff. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 8 and 20, with faint lines of weariness around his eyes, as if he'd seen too many battles. Literal or otherwise, Duke Arthur Blackwood, she would later learn, master of Blackwood Hall, a widower haunted by loss and the weight of his title. But in that moment, as thunder rolled again, Eleanor felt the world tilt. This stranger held her fate in his hands. Would he turn her over to the authorities, or worse, recognize her from some village tale? Her secret teetered on the edge of exposure, and with it the fragile dream of freedom. He set the lantern down, crossing his arms. "Shelter, you say? In a duke's barn, no less. What's a lady like you doing out in this tempest?" "Lady?" The word stung, a reminder of the life she'd rejected. "Not a lady anymore," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Just a woman, running from a cage." His expression softened, just a fraction, but enough to ignite a spark of hope in her chest. Yet as he stepped closer, offering a dry cloak from his saddlebag, Eleanor wondered if she'd traded one prison for another. The night held its breath, and so did she. Word count, 872. The Duke's cloak enveloped Eleanor like a reluctant embrace, heavy with the scent of cedar and horse. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders, the wool rough against her chilled skin, but it warded off the damp that had seeped into her bones. Arthur Blackwood watched her with those piercing blue eyes, the lantern's flame flickering in their depths. He didn't press for more. Not yet. Instead, he gestured toward a weathered bench near the stalls, where his horse, a sleek bay gelding, nosed at a pile of fresh hay. "Sit," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You'll catch your death out here." Eleanor hesitated, glancing at the door as if the storm might part for her escape. But the rain lashed harder, turning the world outside into a blurred watercolor of grey. With a sigh, she perched on the edge of the bench, her hands clasped in her lap to hide their tremble. The Duke busied himself, lighting a small brazier in the corner, its coals soon glowing orange, casting warm shadows that softened the barn's stark lines. "You're not from around these parts," he observed, settling onto a bale of hay across from her. His greatcoat hung open now, revealing a waistcoat of fine wool and a cravat tied with casual precision. At 8 and 20, Arthur carried himself like a man who'd shouldered estates and expectations since boyhood. Blackwood Hall, his ancestral seat in the Cotswolds, sprawled across 5,000 acres of undulating hills and ancient oaks, a place of honeystone manors and whispering gardens, where the air always carried the faint tang of wild thyme. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, though her pulse thrummed. "No, sir. I'm passing through." A lie, thin as the mist rising from the puddles, but she clung to it. He chuckled, a low sound that rumbled like distant thunder. "Passing through a duke's barn at midnight. That's a tale I'd like to hear in full." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the signet ring catching the light again, a Blackwood crest etched with a raven in flight. "But first, some tea. Can't interrogate a half-drowned mouse on an empty stomach." Before she could protest, he rose and rummaged in a saddlebag, producing a battered tin flask and 2 tin cups. Steam curled from the hot liquid he poured. Not tea, but a strong broth laced with herbs, warming her from the first sip. Eleanor sipped cautiously, the heat blooming in her chest, easing the knot of fear. For a moment, The barn felt less like a trap and more like a fragile truce. As the storm eased to a steady patter, Arthur spoke of the land. This corner of Gloucestershire's seen its share of runaways, poachers, debtors, lovers on the lam. But a young woman alone? That's rarer than a dry summer. His voice held no judgment, only a quiet curiosity that invited confession. Eleanor found herself relaxing, just a fraction, the broth loosening her tongue. She was Eleanor Hawthorne, daughter of Reverend Elias Hawthorne, vicar of Willowbrook Village, 5 miles east. Their home was a tidy parsonage with ivy-cloaked walls and a garden bursting with foxgloves in summer. Life there had been predictable, laced with the rhythms of sermons and sewing circles. At 20, Eleanor helped her mother, frail with consumption, tend to the younger girls. Lydia, 15 and dreamy, and little Grace, 10, with curls like spun gold. Her father preached duty above all, his sermons on obedience ringing through the stone church each Sunday. But beneath the calm, tensions simmered. The Hawthorns teetered on the edge of genteel poverty. Elias's living barely covered the coal bills, let alone the dowries for his daughters. Whispers of entailments and failing crops had grown louder after the war with Napoleon drained the countryside. Enter Mr. Reginald Thorne, a merchant from Chipping Norton, 45, with a fortune in wool and a manor house that loomed like a stern sentinel. He'd visited once, his eyes lingering too long on Eleanor during tea, his conversation laced with boasts of his late wife's untimely passing. The betrothal announcement had come at dusk in the parsonage's drawing room, where the fire crackled against the chill of early spring. "It's settled then," Elias had declared, folding the contract with ink-fresh signatures. "Thorne's offer secures our future. You'll wed in June." Eleanor's protests, soft at first, then fierce, fell on deaf ears. Her mother, coughing into a handkerchief, had only nodded weakly. "For the family, dear." That night, as the household slept, Eleanor had packed her satchel. The locket, warm against her skin, whispered of choices her mother had never made. Freedom. She'd slipped out the back door, past the churchyard where headstones gleamed like accusations, and into the night. Hours of walking, dodging hedgerows and owl-haunted woods, until the barn appeared like a shadowed sanctuary. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression unreadable save for a tightening of his jaw when she mentioned Thorne. "A cage, you called it," he said finally, setting his cup aside. "And now you're adrift in the storm. What do you seek, Miss Hawthorne, beyond shelter?" Eleanor stared into the brazier's embers, the question piercing deeper than the cold. "A life of my own, work perhaps, in a place where no one knows my name." But even as she spoke, doubt flickered. The Cotswolds were a web of villages, where news travelled on carriage wheels and servant tongues. Thorne's influence stretched far. He'd boast of the match at the next assembly, painting her as the dutiful bride. The Duke rose, extinguishing the lantern with a practiced flick. Dawn's grey light filtered through the cracks now, painting the stalls in soft hues. "You'll not find anonymity wandering alone. Stay at Blackwood Hall until the road's dry. My housekeeper can find you a room." And discretion. Her heart stuttered. Refuge in a duke's home. It sounded like folly. A step from the frying pan into gilded flames, yet his offer hung there, tempting as the first light. As he saddled his horse, a groom's distant whistle echoed from the estate, the world awakening, indifferent to her turmoil. Eleanor followed him out, the mud sucking at her boots. Blackwood Hall rose in the distance, its towers piercing the mist like promises unspoken. But as they rode, she perched behind him on the gelding, arms tentatively around his waist. A rider approached from the east. A messenger, coat flapping, bearing a sealed letter. Arthur took it, breaking the wax with a frown. His face darkened. "Thorne," he muttered, scanning the words. He's already stirring the pot, claims you've been compromised on the road. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The fragile peace shattered, the Duke's world pulling her deeper into its currents. What secrets did this letter hide, and what price would she pay for the shelter she'd just accepted? The messenger's horse snorted steam into the chill morning air, its flanks lathered from a hard ride. Arthur crumpled the letter in his fist, the wax seal, a crude ram's head, thorn's mark, flaking onto the saddle. Eleanor's grip tightened around his waist as they rode toward Blackwood Hall, the Duke's body tense beneath her. The estate unfolded before them like a waking dream. Honey-coloured stone walls climbing from manicured lawns, ivy tracing the mullioned windows, and beyond, the Cotswolds' gentle swells dotted with grazing sheep, but the idyll shattered with every hoofbeat. Compromised, Eleanor echoed, her voice a whisper lost to the wind. Heat flooded her cheeks, shame mingling with fury. How could Thorne know so soon? Had her father sent word already, or was this some vile trap laid in advance? Arthur reined in the gelding at the grand entrance, where stable boys hurried forward with bows and blankets. He dismounted first, turning to lift her down with hands steady but eyes stormy. He writes as if you're his property already, demands I return you at once, or face consequences. The man's a viper in woolen cloth. Inside the hall, the air hummed with the scent of beeswax polish and fresh bread from the kitchens. Mrs. Hargrove, the housekeeper, a stout woman of 50 with a lace cap pinned firm and keys jingling at her belt, curtsied low. Her grey eyes widened at Eleanor's dishevelled state, the mud-streaked gown, the borrowed cloak swallowing her slender frame. "Your Grace? This?" "A guest," Arthur cut in sharply. "See to her needs, Mrs. Hargrove. A hot bath, dry clothes, and a room in the east wing. No questions. For now." Eleanor followed the housekeeper up the sweeping oak staircase, her half-boots leaving faint prints on the Persian rugs. The east wing was a world apart from the parsonage's cramped chambers, walls papered in pale damask, a four-poster bed draped in chintz, and a fire already crackling in the grate. As servants bustled with basins and linens, Eleanor's mind raced. Refuge here meant entanglement. Arthur Blackwood was no mere landowner. His title commanded respect across Gloucestershire. Association with a runaway could tarnish him, invite scandal to his door. By midday, scrubbed clean and clad in a simple muslin day-dress borrowed from the attics, high-waisted with puffed sleeves, its fabric soft against her skin, Eleanor ventured downstairs. The drawing-room overlooked the gardens, where tulips nodded in the breeze. Arthur stood by the window, the crumpled letter on a side table beside a silver tea service. He turned as she entered, his cravat loosened, revealing the strong column of his throat. "You look less like a drowned sprite," he said, a ghost of a smile softening his features. But it faded quick. "Thorne's letter arrived via your village. Your father must have alerted him at dawn. He's spinning tales of abduction, of all things. Says you're distraught in need of rescue from highwaymen or worse." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "My father? He thinks I've been taken, or is this Thorne's doing to force my return?" She sank into a velvet armchair, the locket heavy at her throat. Freedom felt farther now, a mocking illusion. Arthur poured tea, the china clinking softly. "Both, likely. The parson's no fool. He knows you fled the betrothal, but Thorne's the architect. His mills supply half the county's cloth. He wields influence like a club. If word spreads of you here, unmarried and unchaperoned—" He let the implication hang, steam rising between them. She sipped the tea, its bergamot warmth grounding her. "I can't stay. I'll leave today, head north to the lakes, perhaps. Find work as a companion." "And walk into Thorne's net? Roads are watched now. His men could be combing the lanes as we speak." Arthur paced, his boots silent on the Aubusson carpet. At 28, he'd inherited Blackwood Hall young. after his father's death in the Peninsular War. His own wife, Eliza, had perished in childbirth 3 years past, leaving him with a title heavy as chainmail and a heart guarded tight. Runaways stirred old ghosts, promises broken, lives upended. Eleanor rose, facing him. Then what? I won't crawl back to that marriage. It's a sentence, not a union. Thorn's eyes. They strip you bare. Promise nothing but control. A knock interrupted, urgent. Mrs. Hargrove entered, face pinched. Begging pardon, Your Grace. Riders from Willowbrook, 3 of them at the gate. Say they're from Mr. Thorn. Demand to search the grounds for the missing miss. Arthur's jaw set like flint. Tell them the Duke is from home, no searches without warrant, and summon Mr. Ellis from the study. Eleanor's breath caught. The first real barrier loomed, protocol and power. In this new world of Blackwood Hall, etiquette ruled. Visitors announced, reputations shielded by layers of servants and propriety. But Thorn's men brought the old world's claws, slander ready to slash. Mr. Ellis, the steward, a wiry man in his 40s with spectacles perched on a hawkish nose, arrived swiftly, parchments in hand. Your Grace, if the lady's presence becomes known, it could invite a breach of promise suit, or worse, force a hasty alliance to quiet tongues. Alliance. The word hung like smoke. Arthur glanced at Eleanor, his blue eyes searching. Miss Hawthorne, you have a choice. Return and face Thorn's altar, or stay and let me fend this off. But it means playing by my rules. No wandering alone, no letters out without my seal. Publicly, you're my distant cousin, visiting from Bath. It buys time. Hesitation gripped her. Social cost burned bright. Her name linked to scandal, family shunned. Yet refusal meant recapture, the cage slamming shut. I'll stay. For now. Arthur nodded, relief flickering before resolve hardened. Good. Ellis, draft a reply to Thorn. The lady is safe, but under my protection. No further intrusions. As the steward bowed out, Eleanor felt the shift. Normalcy ruptured. She'd crossed into alliance, bound by unspoken vows. But outside, hooves thundered away, Thorn's men retreating, not defeated. What fresh accusations would they unleash, and how long before the Duke's shield cracked under the weight? The tea grew cold, mirroring the chill settling in her veins. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of Blackwood Hall's drawing room, gilding the edges of the Chippendale chairs and the silver epergne on the mantel. Eleanor smoothed the borrowed gown, pale muslin with a modest ruffle at the neckline, its high waist cinched just enough to hint at elegance without ostentation. It was a far cry from the simple cotton frocks of the parsonage, but she felt exposed, like a doll dressed for inspection. 2 days had passed since Thorn's men turned back from the gates, their retreat a temporary victory. Arthur had kept his word. She was Cousin Eleanor from Bath, a vague relation come to visit amid family illness. The servants whispered, but none dared question a duke's decree. Mrs. Hargrove bustled in, her keys clinking like a herald's bells. The ladies from the village are here for tea, miss, Mrs. Pendleton and her daughter, Miss Clara, and words come that the vicar from Norton, your Mr. Ellis's acquaintance, joins them. Your Grace thought it wise to integrate you gently. Eleanor's stomach knotted. A semi-public tea. In the Cotswolds, such gatherings were minefields of gossip, where sidelong glances carried more weight than words. Arthur had insisted visibility would blunt Thorn's accusations, paint her as respectable guest rather than fugitive. But the thought of scrutiny made her palms damp. She nodded, forcing a smile as the housekeeper led her to the salon, adjoining the drawing room, a cosy space with rosewood tables and shelves of leather-bound volumes, the air scented with lavender from the sachets in the drawers. Arthur entered from the library, his tailcoat impeccably fitted over broad shoulders, breeches tucked into polished hessians. At 8:20, he moved with a quiet authority that filled the room, his dark hair neatly combed, blue eyes alert. "Ready," he murmured, offering his arm. A brush of his sleeve against hers sent a fleeting warmth through her, unintended. Yet it lingered like the echo of a shared secret. The guests arrived in a flutter of silk and shawls. Mrs. Pendleton, a matron of ample proportions with a turban of puce feathers, swept in first, her daughter Clara trailing like a pale shadow. 19, with mousy curls and a gown of sprigged calico that screamed provincial ambition. The vicar, Mr. Beaumont, followed, thin as a reed with wire-rimmed spectacles and a dog collar starched to severity. They curtsied to Arthur, eyes widening at the introduction. "May I present my cousin, Miss Eleanor Hawthorne, lately of Bath," Arthur said smoothly, his hand light on her elbow, a micro-gesture of support, steadying her as the room's gaze turned appraising. "Pleased to make your acquaintance," Eleanor replied, her voice even, though her heart hammered. She extended a gloved hand, the lace borrowed from Mrs. Hargrove's stores. Mrs. Pendleton's smile was all teeth, but her eyes narrowed, flicking over Eleanor's form. "From Bath, you say? Charming city, though one hears such varied company there. And Hawthorne? Not a local name, surely." The subtle barb landed, class friction, probing for cracks. Clara tittered behind her fan, a painted affair of ivory and silk, while Mr. Beaumont cleared his throat. "Indeed, we've had reports of troubles in Willowbrook. A young lady gone missing, they say, betrothal gone awry." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she held her ground, pouring tea from the Wedgwood pot with practiced calm. "Willowbrook is but a stone's throw, yet worlds away. I prefer the quiet of the countryside to Bath's bustle." Arthur interjected, his tone light but firm. "Miss Hawthorne aids in estate matters while here. Her insights on the gardens are invaluable." He gestured to the window, where the tulip beds bloomed in defiant colour. It was a minimal defence, drawing attention from her past, but his glance met hers, a shared silence, brief as a held breath conveying solidarity. The conversation meandered to safer ground, the wool prices at the market, the upcoming assembly in Chipping Norton, yet shadows lurked. As Clara prattled about a new pianoforte at their home, Mrs. Pendleton leaned in, voice low. "One must be cautious with newcomers, especially ladies. Mr. Thorne, that pillar of Norton, spoke of a scandal just yesterday at the inn. A vicar's daughter fled from her duty, shocking if true." Eleanor's cup rattled in its saucer. Thorne, watching from afar, his tendrils reaching through village tongues. She set the tea down, fingers brushing a small brooch on the side table, an antique piece of cameos, Eliza's once, left there by Arthur that morning. It caught her eye, a profile of a woman in profile, serene amid waves. Symbolic, unbidden, it sparked an emotional thread, loss mirrored in its quiet beauty. "Scandals bloom like weeds," Eleanor said softly, her voice gaining steel. "But duty need not mean chains. Some choose paths less trodden." Mr. Beaumont frowned, adjusting his spectacles. Bold words for a guest. "Propriety guides us all." Arthur's hand grazed hers as he passed the plate of seed cakes, a touch accidental yet electric, warming the chill of humiliation. "Miss Hawthorne speaks from experience. Her late aunt in Bath taught her the value of independence." The tea wore on, the air thick with unspoken judgments. Clara eyed the brooch with envy, Mrs. Pendleton's feathers quivering with curiosity. As farewells were made, curtsies and promises of calls, Eleanor felt the friction sting, acceptance tentative, rejection veiled in smiles. But Arthur's presence anchored her, a small advance in their fragile alliance. They watched the carriage rattle away from the portico, dust rising in the lane. "You held your own," Arthur said, turning to her. His eyes held hers longer than propriety allowed, a flicker of admiration breaking through his reserve. Yet as the door closed, a groom approached, hat in hand. "Your Grace, a parcel from Norton, no sender marked, but inside. A newspaper clipping." Arthur unfolded it, the Gloucestershire Gazette, fresh off the press. A society note, buried in the columns. Whispers from Willowbrook. A vicar's daughter vanished on eve of nuptials to esteemed merchant. Sighted near Blackwood lands. The Duke's hospitality extends far, it seems. Eleanor's blood chilled. Thorne's shadow lengthened. The clipping a visible lash. Public eyes turned now, and with them the first cracks in her borrowed sanctuary. What venom would the next edition spew, and how long before the Duke's protection demanded a steeper price? The evening shadows stretched long across Blackwood Hall's library, where shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound tomes, and the faint scent of aged paper mingled with wood smoke from the hearth. A sudden gale rattled the leaded panes, whipping rain against the glass like an angry swarm. Eleanor had sought refuge here after the tea's ordeal, the newspaper clipping burning a hole in her pocket. Arthur had dismissed the servants early, citing the storm's fury, but truth be told, he craved the quiet to think. Now, thunder cracked overhead, and the house seemed to huddle in on itself, isolating them in this vast, book-lined sanctum. She perched on a wing-back chair by the fire, the brooch from the tea, Arthur's late wife's cameo, clutched in her hand. He'd left it on the mantel earlier, absent-mindedly, but she'd pocketed it after the guests departed, drawn to its serene profile amid carved waves. It felt like a talisman, heavy with unspoken grief. Arthur entered from the adjoining study, a decanter of brandy in one hand, 2 glasses in the other. His tailcoat was unbuttoned, cravat loosened, revealing the pulse at his throat. At 8 and 20, the lines around his blue eyes spoke of burdens older than his years. "Storm's worsening," he said, setting the glasses down with a soft clink. "Roads will be impassable till morning. No visitors, no messengers. A mercy, perhaps." Eleanor nodded, her chestnut hair loose now, falling in waves over the simple evening gown of soft cambric that Mrs. Hargrove had provided, high-necked with long sleeves, its fabric whispering against her skin. The isolation pressed in, forcing proximity. She held out the brooch. It's beautiful, but it carries a story, doesn't it?" He paused, the firelight dancing across his strong jaw. For a moment his guard slipped, vulnerability flickering like the flames. He took the cameo, fingers brushing hers, a fleeting touch that sent warmth spiraling through her, unbidden and intense. "Eliza's," he murmured, settling into the chair opposite. "She wore it on our wedding day. Carved from shell, they said, to capture the sea's calm. She loved the ocean, though we were landlocked here." The storm howled, wind moaning through the chimney. Eleanor leaned forward, drawn by the raw edge in his voice. "You speak of her as if the loss still cuts deep." Arthur poured the brandy, the amber liquid glinting. He handed her a glass, their eyes meeting over the rim. A shared silence, heavy with the weight of confessions not yet voiced. 3 years gone. Childbirth took her, and the babe with her. I was in London, arguing estates in Parliament. Duty, they call it. I returned to find her cold. His voice cracked, just a fraction, and he looked away into the fire. "Guilt's a cruel master, Miss Hawthorne. It whispers you could have changed it all." Eleanor's heart ached, mirroring her own fractures. She sipped the brandy, its burn steadying her. "I know guilt. My mother's fading, cough stealing her breath day by day. Father's sermons on Providence ring hollow when I see her waste away. And Lydia, Grace, they look to me for strength I don't have, fleeing thorn. It was selfish, perhaps, but staying meant watching my dreams die first." Thunder boomed, shaking the room, and a gust snuffed a candle, plunging one corner into shadow. Arthur rose, relighting it with a taper. his silhouette tall and protective. When he sat again, closer now, their knees nearly touching. "Thorne's no husband. I've heard the tales. His first wife broken under his roof, cruelty masked as discipline. You did right to run." She searched his face, the fire casting golden highlights on his dark hair. "And you, a duke, yet you hide in this hall, shouldering losses alone. Why not remarry as society demands? Secure the line?" He laughed bitterly, a sound without mirth. "Titles are chains too. My father's war left debts. Eliza's dowry patched them. Now every match is calculated, fortune over heart. I've sworn off it." His gaze softened, holding hers, until perhaps something real stirs the embers. The words hung, a tacit promise, shifting the air between them. Eleanor's breath caught, the emotional tide rising, trust blooming in the storm's confinement. She reached out, placing her hand over his on the armrest, a gesture simple yet profound. His fingers curled around hers, warm and steady, no demand, just connection. In that touch, layers peeled back, his guarded heart humanized, her defiance softened by understanding. The brooch lay between them on the table, a bridge from past wounds to fragile hope. Outside, the tempest raged, but here, intimacy forged in whispers and firelight. Arthur's thumb traced a gentle circle on her knuckles, eyes conveying what words dared not. Loyalty, perhaps more. Eleanor felt seen, not as a runaway, but as Eleanor. A sharp rap at the door shattered the moment. Mrs. Hargrove burst in, soaked shawl dripping, face ashen. "Your Grace, a rider braved the gale from Norton. Mr. Thorne's man with a letter insists it's urgent." Arthur's hand released Eleanor's, tension coiling back into his frame. He took the sealed missive, breaking the ram's headwax. His expression darkened as he read. "He knows you're here, threatens to expose us both, claims witnesses saw you enter my lands, demands your return by dawn, or he'll drag your name through every gazette from here to London." Eleanor's warmth fled, replaced by ice. The emotional high crashed, Thorne's shadow slithering in. Trust strengthened, yet now peril loomed larger, pulling them toward confrontation. What schemes brewed in the night, and how much would this forced closeness cost them both? The first light of dawn crept through the library curtains like a thief, pale and unforgiving. Eleanor hadn't slept. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy with damp earth and the faint, acrid scent of wet stone. She sat by the dying embers, the brooch still in her lap, its cameo's waves now mocking her turmoil. Arthur had paced half the night after reading Thorne's letter, his broad frame casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Now, he stood at the window, fists clenched at his sides. The missive crumpled on the table beside the untouched brandy glasses. "We face this head-on," he said finally, turning to her. His blue eyes held a storm of their own, resolve mixed with something deeper, a protectiveness that had bloomed in the night's confessions. "I'll ride to Norton today, confront the man myself. No more shadows." Eleanor's heart twisted. The intimacy of hours past felt fragile now, like frost on a window pane. And if he twists it further? Your name dragged into the mud with mine. A duke sheltering a runaway. Society will feast on that. He crossed to her, kneeling briefly to take her hands in his. The touch was warm, steadying. His calloused fingers, marks of a man who rode his own lands, not just oversaw them, enveloping hers. "Let them. I've faced worse than gossip. Eliza's death taught me reputations are hollow shields. Yours matters more." She searched his face, the faint stubble shadowing his jaw, the weariness etching lines around his mouth. At 28, he carried the weight of Blackwood Hall like an invisible yoke. Debts from the war, tenants struggling after poor harvests, and now this entanglement. Yet in his gaze she saw no regret, only a fierce loyalty that mirrored her own budding trust. For a moment, The world narrowed to that connection, a silent vow amid the morning's hush. But the reprieve shattered with a frantic knock. Mrs. Hargrove burst in, her lace cap askew, a tray of breakfast forgotten in her hands. "Your Grace! Riders! A whole party from Willowbrook and Norton." At the gates again with the magistrate, Mr. Thorne leads them, says he has proof of impropriety, demands entry. Arthur rose swiftly, his jaw tightening like a vice. The magistrate, Beaumont's replacement from Chipping Norton. He glanced at Eleanor, urgency sharpening his features. "Stay here. Lock the door if need be." She nodded, but fear coiled in her gut as he strode out. The hall echoed with his boots on the marble floors, then the distant murmur of voices swelling like a tide. From the window, she watched. Thorne's carriage, black and squat, flanked by 4 mounted men in rough wool coats. Reginald Thorne dismounted first. A bull of a man at 45, his face ruddy under a tricorn hat, side whiskers framing a mouth twisted in smug triumph. Beside him, the magistrate Mr. Hargreaves, a portly fellow in black bombazine, spectacles glinting, unrolled a parchment. Eleanor's father was there too, Reverend Hawthorne, dishevelled in his clerical coat, his thin frame bowed as if the weight of scandal pressed him down. Elias's eyes scanned the hall's facade, pleading and pained. No Lydia or Grace. They'd been shielded perhaps from this spectacle. Arthur met them at the portico, his stance unyielding, arms crossed over his chest. Voices carried on the breeze, sharp, accusatory. "Kidnapped under cover of night," Thorne bellowed, waving the letter like a banner. "My betrothed, lured by your false hospitality, Your Grace. Witnesses place her here. The girl's ruined, unchaperoned in your house. I'll have justice or the courts will." Elias stepped forward, voice trembling. "Arthur, Your Grace, please. Eleanor's headstrong. But this, it's madness. Return her for her sake. The family's name." Arthur's reply cut like steel. "Miss Hawthorne is under my protection, Reverend. No evidence of kidnapping. And as for betrothals, contracts can be voided. She's made her choice clear." Thorne's laugh was a bark, ugly and raw. He thrust forward a sheaf of papers, affidavits, scrawled in hasty ink. "Choice. She's a vicar's chit, playing at independence. But look here. Sworn statements from villagers. They saw her flee, then tracks leading to your barn. And this," he brandished a locket, Eleanor's locket, dangling from a chain, dropped in the mud. Proof she was here, compromising herself. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her throat. Empty. She'd lost it in the storm, perhaps, during their ride from the barn. Now it dangled like a noose in Thorne's fist. The magistrate cleared his throat, peering at the documents. "Serious allegations, Your Grace. If true, breach of promise, even abduction. I must insist on speaking to the young lady." From her vantage, Eleanor saw Arthur's shoulders stiffen, but he held firm. "Not without cause. This is my home, Hargreaves. No warrant, no entry." Murmurs rippled through the riders, grooms and constables, eyes wide at the standoff. Thorne pressed closer, face inches from Arthur's. "You'll regret this, Blackwood. My mills clothe half the county. I'll spread it far. The Duke, preying on innocence. Your tenants will hear your peers in London. Isolation, boy, that's your future." The words landed like blows. Wounding publicly. Arthur's alliance with Eleanor, their fragile trust, now exposed, twisted into fodder for scandal sheets. Elias hung his head, a tangible loss, paternal support crumbling under pressure. Whispers would fly to Willowbrook, branding her a seductress, him a libertine. Eleanor couldn't watch more. She slipped from the library, heart pounding, fleeing to her room in the east wing. The door clicked shut, but isolation wrapped around her like chains. Downstairs, voices rose, Thorne's ultimatum echoing, "By noon, or we return with the sheriff." Hours blurred. Arthur entered her chamber later, face grim, the locket in his palm. "They've gone for now, but the damage." Hargreaves took statements. Thorne's planted seeds. Your father, he begged me to send you back, said the family can't bear the shame. Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. And you? What now? He placed the locket in her hand, his touch lingering but distant now, emotional barriers rising. I stand by you, but this changes everything. No return to simplicity. We've crossed a line. No going back to the world before the barn. She nodded, clutching the chain. The point of no return. Her flight. Once personal, now a public war. Thorne's sabotage had fractured their budding bond, forcing separation. Not physical, but a chasm of doubt. Arthur withdrew to his study, leaving her alone with the weight of isolation. Outside, carriage wheels crunched away, but the echo of Thorne's threat lingered, a social ultimatum, promising ruin if she didn't yield. What fracture would widen next, tearing them apart for good? The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Eleanor's chamber in Blackwood Hall, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor like fleeting promises. She paced the room, the locket now restored to her throat, its chain a cool reminder of the morning's humiliation. Thorne's threats echoed in her mind, his ruddy face twisted in that smug demand for her surrender. Arthur had retreated to his study after the confrontation, his parting words clipped. Rest. I'll handle the fallout. But isolation chafed. She couldn't hide like a mouse in the wainscoting. Not anymore. Downstairs, the house stirred with subdued activity. Servants polished silver in hushed tones, aware of the storm brewing beyond the gates. Eleanor paused at her writing desk, fingers tracing the edge of a fresh sheet of vellum. Inkwell and quill waited, symbols of agency she'd rarely wielded. In Willowbrook, her voice had been soft, helping with lessons, soothing her mother's coughs. But here, in this gilded cage turned battlefield, silence meant defeat. She dipped the quill, the scratch of nib on paper steadying her resolve. Dearest father, I write not in rebellion, but in truth. Mr. Thorne's pursuit is no noble rescue. His intentions twist duty into chains. I fled not from family, but from a union that promises misery. Seek no more. Let me forge my path. The words flowed, raw and unpolished, but honest. She sealed the letter with wax, pressing the hawthorn crest from her ring, a simple dove, emblem of peace now turned defiant. Mrs. Hargrove would dispatch it discreetly, via a trusted groom to Willowbrook. It was a small act, yet it shifted something within her, from fugitive to claimant of her narrative. As evening fell, Arthur sought her out in the library, where the fire crackled against the encroaching chill. He carried a leather-bound ledger under his arm, his blue eyes shadowed by fatigue. The lines around his mouth deepened as he settled into the wing-back chair opposite her. Thorne's men scattered tales like chaff in the wind, the magistrates wavering. But I've sent word to my solicitor in London. We need proof to counter his lies. Eleanor leaned forward, the letter's weight still fresh in her mind. Proof? What if it's not just about me? Thorne's mills, I've heard whispers in the village. Debts, perhaps, or something tying back to you. He hesitated, then opened the ledger, pages yellowed with age. Eliza's dowry cleared my father's war debts 3 years past, but Thorne, he supplied the wool for Blackwood's tenants during the lean winters. I signed notes for advances, generous at the time. Now look here, his finger traced a column of figures, ink faded but damning. Interest compounded. He's called in half the sum, claiming default. If unpaid, he seizes lands, prime pastures bordering his estates. Eleanor's breath caught. Manipulation, structural and sly. Thorne hadn't just pursued her for a trophy wife. He'd woven a web around Blackwood Hall itself. He used the betrothal as leverage. Marry me, control the Hawthorne living, your neighbour's goodwill, and squeeze you dry. It's a plot, Arthur, not cold ambition, but calculated ruin. Arthur's jaw tightened, but his gaze softened on her, reframing the distance he'd shown earlier. It wasn't aloofness. It was duty's burden, a guilt over Eliza's loss chaining him from deeper ties. You've seen it clear. I held back, fearing another loss, but your flight stirred something. Trust, perhaps, more than duty. The admission hung between them, a peak of hope amid the valley's threat. Eleanor reached across the table, her hand covering his, warm, reassuring. No grand passion, but a contained reapproximation. Trust bridging the chasm. His fingers intertwined with hers, a silent acknowledgement. For a moment the library felt intimate, the fire's glow wrapping them in shared resolve. Yet danger crested swiftly. A knock shattered the quiet. Mr. Ellis, the steward, entered with a sealed packet, face pale. From Norton, your grace, intercepted by the gatekeeper. Thorne's hand, no doubt. Arthur broke the ram's head seal, unfolding a single sheet. Eleanor's heart pounded as he read aloud, voice low and edged with fury. Blackwood, your debts mount like winter snows. Pay by week's end, or lose the east fields. And the girl? Her letter to the vicar arrived, bold but foolish. I've copies now, twisted for the Gazette. She'll be painted a wanton, you her accomplice. Join me at the Chipping Norton Assembly tomorrow night, or watch your world crumble. Indignation surged through Eleanor, hot and righteous. Thorne's villainy laid bare, not mere cruelty, but a predator preying on vulnerabilities. Her family's poverty, Arthur's grief-forged isolation, the estate's fragile ledgers. The public scorn would peak here. Against this merchant who cloaked greed in propriety, she rose, chin lifted. No more hiding, I'll go to the assembly, speak my truth publicly, not as a runaway, but as a woman reclaiming her name. Arthur's eyes widened, admiration flickering. It's risky. Society's a viper's nest. Gossip could seal our fates. But inaction seals them worse. She penned a swift note to Mrs. Pendleton, the tea hostess from days past, an invitation to ally, or at least witness, proactive, altering perceptions. One matron's ear could sway whispers to support. As she sealed it, Arthur nodded, his hand squeezing hers once more. Then we face it together. The peak of hope swelled, their alliance strengthening, Thorne's threat only fueling their fire. But as night deepened, Ellis returned with grim news. Riders spotted on the roads, bearing Thorne's mark. Each advance evoked greater peril. The assembly loomed as a decisive arena where words could shatter or bind. What confrontation awaited under the chandeliers, and would their trust withstand the merchant's final snare? If you're enjoying this tale so far, the Duke and Eleanor's growing bond amid rising stakes, hit that like button to show your support. Your thumbs up keeps these stories coming. The chandeliers of the Chipping Norton assembly rooms glittered like captured stars, casting a warm glow over the throng of silk-clad figures swirling across the polished oak floor. Fiddles and cellos wove a lively country dance, but the air hummed with undercurrents sharper than the scent of beeswax and perfume. Eleanor stood at the edge of the ballroom, her heart pounding in rhythm with the music. The gown Mrs. Hargrove had unearthed from the attics, a soft emerald silk with a high waist and delicate lace trim at the bodice, hugged her frame modestly, its full skirts whispering against the floor. At 20, she felt every eye upon her, not as a wallflower, but as the storm's eye. Arthur lingered nearby, his black tailcoat cut to perfection over a crisp white waistcoat, his dark hair tamed into waves. He caught her gaze across the crush of guests, a subtle nod, conveying their plan. No grand entrance. They'd arrived separately, she on the arm of Mrs. Pendleton, who'd warmed to Eleanor's note with surprising vigour. "Scandal or not, girl, you've spine," the matron had declared over tea that afternoon. Now Pendleton's turban bobbed as she chatted with locals, her presence a shield of respectability. Thorne was here, of course. Eleanor spotted him across the room, a hulking figure in puce velvet, his side whiskers quivering as he held court near the punch bowl. Flanked by sycophants, 2 merchants from Norton and the wavering magistrate Hargreaves, he gestured broadly, his voice carrying like a foghorn. The Duke's folly, mark my words. Sheltering that vicar's chit, it's an affront to decency. Whispers rippled outward, heads turning. Clara Pendleton, wide-eyed in sprigged muslin, tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mamma, is it true? Miss Hawthorne, the runaway?" Eleanor straightened, chin lifting. The time for shadows had passed. As the dance ended in a flurry of curtsies and bows, she moved forward, weaving through the crowd with deliberate grace. Arthur fell in step behind her, his presence a silent bulwark. The assembly's heart, the long gallery lined with punch tables and potted ferns, grew hushed as she approached Thorne's circle. "Mr. Thorne," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the murmur like a bell. All eyes swung to her, shock, curiosity, a few gasps. "You've spoken much of me this eve. Perhaps it's time I speak for myself." Thorne's ruddy face split into a predatory grin, but his eyes narrowed, calculating. He set down his glass with a clink. "Miss Hawthorne, bold of you to show. Come to beg forgiveness. Or has Blackwood's coin bought your tongue?" Laughter tittered from his cronies, but Eleanor held her ground, the locket at her throat a steady weight. "Forgiveness? For fleeing a betrothal built on coercion?" "No, sir. I've come to unveil the truth you've buried under your bluster." The magistrate shifted uncomfortably, polishing his spectacles. Guests pressed closer. Mrs. Pendleton, the Beaumonts, even the vicar from Willowbrook, Elias Hawthorne, pale and hovering at the fringe. Arthur stepped to her side, his hand brushing her elbow, a contained gesture, electric with support. Thorne's laugh boomed, but it rang hollow. "Truth? I've proof aplenty." He snapped his fingers, and a liveried servant produced a leather dossier, thick as a prayer book. "Affidavits from Willowbrook folk. Your flight, miss, witnessed, and letters, forged or not, painting you compromised in that barn. Blackwood's involvement, scandalous. I'll see you both ruined in the courts." He flung open the dossier, pages fluttering like dark wings. A forged letter purportedly from Eleanor tumbled out, its script mocking her hand. "Dearest Thorne, forgive my folly with the Duke." Gasps echoed. Hargreaves leaned in, frowning. This changes matters." Eleanor's pulse thundered, but she drew a steady breath. The sabotage landed hard. Thorne's final thrust, a bought witness lurking in the shadows, ready to swear to the letter's authenticity. Humiliation clawed at her, the crowd's judgment a palpable weight. Yet she saw the flicker in Thorne's eyes. Overconfidence. "Not so fast," she countered, voice rising with quiet steel. From her reticule, she withdrew the ledger Arthur had shown her, its pages marked with red ink. "Your debts to Blackwood Hall, Mr. Thorne. Advances on wool. Compounded interest you twisted into nooses, but look closer." She flipped to a testimony, sworn by a tenant farmer from the East Fields, old Mr. Wilkins, whose family Thorne had threatened over rents. "You called in notes not for repayment, but to seize lands adjoining your mills. And this betrothal? Leverage to silence the Hawthorns, your neighbors, who knew of your late wife's untimely end." Murmurs swelled, Thorne's face drained of color. "Lies! That farmer's in your pay." But Mrs. Pendleton stepped forward, her ample form commanding attention. "Not lies, sir. My husband trades cloth. He's seen your ledgers. And as for the wife, whispers of bruises hidden under long sleeves. I buried the rumors out of pity, but no more." The vicar, Elias, pushed through, his clerical coat rumpled. "Eleanor, daughter!" His eyes brimmed, but he turned to Thorne. "You've preyed on my family, twisted duty into debt. I see it now." Arthur's voice joined, deep and resonant. "The Duke stands with Miss Hawthorne, not as seducer but protector. Thorne's web unravels here, greed masked as propriety." The crowd shifted, whispers turning to outrage. A merchant spat. "Thief in our midst!" Hargreaves snatched the dossier, scanning the forgeries. "These signatures get inconsistent. Bought testimony by God. Thorn backed away, sweat beading on his brow, his empire crumbling under the chandelier's unforgiving light. You'll regret this. But his bluster faltered as two constables, summoned by a nod from Arthur, approached. Wrists ready for irons if needed. Eleanor met Thorn's glare, her choice moral and clear, truth over silence, agency over submission. The assembly reeled, from humbling her as fugitive to hailing her as the unmasked heroine. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then roaring. Mrs. Pendleton embraced her, tears in her eyes. Brave girl, you've turned the tide. Thorn slunk away, dossier in tatters, his reputation shattered like fine china underfoot. The victory surged through Eleanor, euphoric, cathartic, the emotional storm breaking into sunlight. Arthur's hand found hers amid the press, fingers intertwining in a tacit commitment, warm and unspoken. Their eyes met, the noise fading to a shared silence, promising depths beyond the dance. Yet as the music swelled anew, a groom slipped Arthur a note, sealed with the hawthorn dove, but stained with urgency. Elias's hand, or Thorn's dying gasp? The night held one last shadow, whispering of resolutions yet to come. If this triumphant clash has you cheering for Eleanor and Arthur, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any other thrilling stories like this one. The morning after the assembly dawned crisp and golden over Blackwood Hall, the Cotswolds hills rolling like a verdant sea under a sky scrubbed clean by the night's tempests. Eleanor stood at her chamber window, the emerald gown from the evening folded neatly on the bed, its lace edges whispering of battles won. Sleep had come in fits, haunted by the roar of applause and Thorn's retreating snarl. But now resolve settled over her like a warm shawl. The note from the previous night, Elias's hand, trembling but true, had begged forgiveness and promised support. No more chains. Downstairs in the sunlit breakfast parlour, Arthur awaited. He rose as she entered, his blue eyes lighting with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. No longer the guarded duke, he moved with ease, pouring coffee from a silver pot into delicate china cups. The air carried the aroma of fresh scones and marmalade, a simple feast amid the estate's polished oak beams and tapestried walls. The solicitor's report arrived at first light, he said, sliding a crisp parchment across the table. Thorn's undone. Eleanor scanned the lines, her fingers steady. Legal threads unravelled swiftly. The magistrate, swayed by the Assembly's revelations, had seized Thorn's dossier as evidence of forgery. Affidavits from tenants poured in overnight, tales of coerced rents, hidden debts, even whispers of his first wife's despair. Confirmed by a long, silent maid, the merchant's wool empire teetered, banks called in loans, partners withdrew. By noon, word spread. Thorn faced charges of fraud and extortion, his Norton Manor mortgaged to the hilt. Exile loomed, perhaps to the Americas, stripped of prestige, his ram's head seal ground to dust. "And my family?" she asked, voice soft but edged with hope. Arthur's hand covered hers, warm and sure. "Your father rides here today, the living at Willowbrook secured, Thorn's influence shattered. Elias vows to mend what he broke, for Lydia and Grace's sake." Relief washed through her, a tide turning. No more isolation, the Hawthorns would thrive, her mother's care funded by a discreet settlement from Blackwood's coffers. Mrs. Pendleton had already sent a basket of linens and invitations, her alliance sealed. Even Mr. Hargreaves, the magistrate, penned a note of apology, pledging to quash any lingering rumours. Side players repositioned. Clara Pendleton, inspired, talked of her own pursuits beyond marriage. The Vicar Beaumont preached on true duty at Sunday service, his words echoing Eleanor's stand. As the clock struck 11, Elias arrived in a hired gig, his clerical coat dusted from the road. He dismounted at the portico, face lined but eyes clear. Eleanor met him in the drawing room, Arthur a step behind. Daughter, Elias began, voice thick, embracing her fiercely. I was blind. Duty blinded me to your heart. Forgiven, old fool. Tears pricked her eyes. Forgiven, father. But promise me, no more cages for any of us. He nodded, glancing at Arthur with newfound respect. The Duke. He's a good man. Rare in these times. The reunion flowed into luncheon, tensions easing like mist under sun. Lydia and Grace would visit soon, the parsonage's shadows lifting. Arthur watched, a faint smile playing on his lips, his transformation evident. The weight of Eliza's loss lightened, grief yielding to compassion. No longer chained by guilt, he spoke of reforms, clearing tenant debts, planting new orchards on the reclaimed East Fields, a legacy born. Blackwood Hall as beacon, not burden. By afternoon, the parlour emptied, leaving Eleanor and Arthur alone. Sunlight slanted through the windows, gilding the rosewood table where a small velvet box waited. He opened it, revealing a simple gold band, unadorned, no heirlooms to haunt. No contracts, no titles dictating this, he said, voice low, eyes locking on hers. By choice, Eleanor. As equals. Will you? Her heart soared, the room fading to their shared breath. She extended her hand, the ring sliding onto her finger like a vow fulfilled. No grand ritual, just truth. He drew her close, their foreheads touching, then tilted her chin. The kiss came soft at first, deepening with the passion of survivors, lips meeting in love's pure fire, hands framing faces worn by trials. Time paused, the world beyond the kiss irrelevant. They parted, breaths mingling, laughter bubbling free. To the future, Arthur murmured, gesturing to the window. Beyond, workers tilled the East Fields, a schoolhouse foundation rising near the village. Eleanor's idea for girls like Grace, teaching letters and dreams. Legacy in action, education funded by salvaged debts. A horizon bright with possibility. Yet as evening fell, a soft knock brought Mr. Ellis with a letter, sealed in plain wax. From London. Arthur broke it open, brow furrowing slightly. An invitation. Parliament seeks my voice on estate reforms. And a whisper of Thorn's ship sailing west, but not before one last plea for mercy. Eleanor smiled, leaning into him. Threads tied, but life whispered on, new chapters in the making. The Cotswolds stretched eternal, their love its steadfast heart. 5 years had woven their gentle tapestry over Blackwood Hall, transforming the Cotswolds' rolling hills into a landscape richer with memory than strife. The East Fields, once shadowed by Thorn's grasping debts, now bloomed with golden wheat under a late summer sun, their bounty-feeding tenants who whispered thanks at harvest suppers. The schoolhouse Eleanor had championed stood sturdy at the village edge, whitewashed stone with a bell tower that chimed lessons for girls from Willowbrook to Norton. Laughter echoed from its open windows, where young voices recited poetry and ciphered sums, dreams no longer confined to parsonage hearths. Eleanor Blackwood, Duchess now at 25, strolled the garden path, her hand resting on the swell of her belly, the third child stirring within like a promise fulfilled. Her chestnut hair, once wild in flight, fell in soft curls beneath a wide-brimmed bonnet of straw and silk ribbons, tied in a bow that fluttered like freedom's echo. The gown she wore, a simple muslin in pale lavender with its high waist adjusted for comfort, whispered against the gravel. No longer the runaway in mud-caked boots, she moved with the quiet grace of a woman who had claimed her world. Arthur rode up from the stables, dismounting with the ease of habit, his bay gelding, the same from that stormy night, snorting contentedly as a groom led it away. At 33, the Duke's frame had filled out with purpose, his dark hair touched by silver at the temples, blue eyes crinkling with the warmth that grief had once veiled. He wore a riding coat of fine wool, breeches tucked into boots, polished by daily rounds of the estate. Spotting her, he crossed the lawn in long strides, pulling her into an embrace that lingered, his hand gentle over hers on her abdomen. "Out too long in the sun," he murmured, lips brushing her temple. The scent of leather and thyme clung to him, a reminder of rides shared through meadows and trials. She smiled, leaning into his strength. The children needed Eyre. Eliza's chasing butterflies by the fountain, and Thomas practices his letters under the oak. Their firstborn, a boy of 3 with Arthur's piercing gaze and her stubborn chin, sat cross-legged on a blanket, quill in fist, scribbling earnest shapes. Beside him, little Eliza, named for the shadow that had faded into light, toddled after a ladybug, her pinafore smeared with earth, curls bouncing like spun gold. Arthur knelt to scoop the girl into his arms, her giggles peeling as he twirled her. "Papa's home, Sprite." Thomas looked up, beaming, ink smudged on his cheek. "Look, Mama, I wrote freedom, like your locket." Eleanor's throat tightened, the word a bridge from that rain-lashed barn. The locket still hung at her neck, its engraving polished by years of touch. Freedom, yes, but earned in love's quiet forge. Their wedding had come that autumn after the assembly, a simple ceremony in Blackwood's chapel, vows exchanged before family and friends under arches of wild roses. No grand society affair. Just Elias's blessing, tearful and whole, with Lydia as bridesmaid, now wed to a kind curate in Kent, her own life blooming. And Grace, at 15, reciting a poem she'd penned on courage. The years had tested and tempered them. Arthur's voice in Parliament, sparked by that London invitation, pushed reforms for tenant rights and women's education. His speeches drawing nods from lords who'd once whispered of scandal. Blackwood Hall thrived, orchards heavy with apples, a library expanded with volumes on history and herbals, where Eleanor taught evening classes. Their bond, born in storm and standoff, deepened in hearthside evenings, shared glances over supper, hands entwined in the quiet of their bedchamber, passion a steady flame. Not wildfire, yet shadows lingered, paid in full by those who sowed them. Thorne's fate had sealed harshly. Frauds unravelled, his mills seized by creditors, the merchant fled to the colonies in chains of debt, not irons, but exile's bite proved sharper. Whispers reached England of his decline, a broken man in Virginia's wilds, fortune squandered, name synonymous with greed. Elias, redeemed in his final years, passed peacefully 2 winters past, his last sermon on grace echoing Eleanor's stand. The parsonage now housed a young family, Willowbrook's scars healed by time and truth. Mrs. Pendleton visited often, her turban traded for a lace cap, Clara at her side, unwed still but thriving as a painter, her canvases capturing Cotswold's mists for London salons. Hargreaves, the magistrate, retired with a clear conscience, his daughter enrolling in the schoolhouse. Even the old barn, site of that fateful night, stood restored as a hayloft for village fetes, its beams festooned with lanterns at midsummer dances. As the sun dipped, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, Arthur set Eliza down, drawing Eleanor close. The children scampered ahead toward the house, Thomas tugging his sister's hand. 5 years, Arthur said softly, his breath warm against her ear, from a duke's shelter to this, our world. She turned in his arms, eyes meeting his, storm-tossed seas to steady blue. And it endures, stronger for the running. He kissed her then, slow and deep, the horizon stretching before them like an open road. Laughter from the children carried on the breeze, mingling with the rustle of leaves. Legacy lived, in their faces, their works, the love that time could not erode. Blackwood Hall stood sentinel, its honeystone walls whispering of trials past and joys unbound. In the Cotswolds' embrace, Eleanor knew, no cage could hold a heart set free. As the echoes of Eleanor's story fade into the golden haze of that Cotswold sunset, we find ourselves lingering on the timeless truths woven through her journey. What began as a desperate flight from a loveless union blossomed into a testament to courage, the kind that reshapes not just one life, but entire worlds. Eleanor Hawthorne, now Blackwood, didn't merely escape a cage, she dismantled it, brick by brick, proving that true freedom isn't handed down from titles or traditions, but forged in the quiet fire of personal resolve. Think on the lessons here, friends. First, duty without heart is a hollow chain, binding us to shadows of expectation. Eleanor's father learned that the hard way, his rigid sermons giving way to grace only after loss, cracked his armor. We all carry such burdens, family pressures, societal whispers that demand we sacrifice dreams for security. Yet her stand at the assembly reminds us, speak your truth, even when voices rise against you. Silence empowers the thorns of this world, those greedy souls who twist vulnerability into weapons. Indignation against such villains fuels change. It's the spark that turns whispers into roars. Toppling empires built on deceit and love. Ah, that's the euphoria we all crave, the cathartic reward after storms of doubt. Arthur and Eleanor's bond wasn't scripted by contracts or convenience. It grew from shared glances in barns and libraries, from hands clasped amid thunder and triumph. It teaches us that real partnership blooms between equals, where protection isn't possession, but a mutual lifting of burdens. 5 years on, with children laughing in the gardens and legacies rising like those schoolhouse walls, their story whispers, endurance isn't passive. It's active, daily choices to nurture what time tests. This tale of Regency hearts and hidden strengths leaves us inspired, doesn't it? To chase our own freedoms, to call out the injustices that cage us, to build loves that weather any gale. If Eleanor's defiance stirred something in you, a spark of empathy for her terror in the rain, outrage at Thorne's schemes, or pure joy in that final kiss, drop a comment below. Tell me, what moment hit you hardest? Did her first encounter with the Duke in the barn make your heart race? Or was it the assembly's turning point that had you cheering? To show you've journeyed all the way to this heartfelt end, write the word freedom in the comments. Eleanor's locket word, the one that started it all. It'll help me know you stayed till the last breath. And who knows, it might just inspire the next viewer to dive in. Your words spread these stories farther, building our community of dreamers and rebels. If this Regency romance left you yearning for more tales of forbidden flights, unlikely alliances, and victories snatched from the jaws of fate, check out the cards popping up now. I've got similar epics waiting. Runaway brides in misty moors, dukes with secrets in shadowed halls. Hit play, and let's keep the adventure rolling. Thank you for sharing this time with Eleanor and Arthur. Their world may be 2 centuries past, but its lessons light our paths today, until the next story unfolds. Keep running toward your freedoms.